The last deception. The room felt oppressive, the silence heavy, like the air itself had decided to hold its breath. Everything seemed frozen, waiting for the truth to break through. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the open suitcase in front of him. He was supposed to be packing for a business trip. It was routine, 2 days away, a few meetings, nothing out of the ordinary. But everything inside him screamed that tonight was different. His wife, Claire, had changed. It wasn't obvious at first, little things that were easy to dismiss. But it had grown, a slow-building storm he could no longer ignore. The whispered phone calls late at night, her sudden need to stay late at work, and the way her eyes sparkled whenever her phone buzzed. He'd catch her smiling at her screen like a teenager with a crush, and every time, his stomach twisted a little tighter. Tonight, she had been practically glowing. But it wasn't the kind of glow that came from love. No, this was different. It was anticipation, excitement. Not for him, but for someone else. She couldn't wait for him to leave. The realization hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. And yet, he said nothing. He simply smiled, kissed her on the cheek, and told her he'd be back in 2 days. She had kissed him back, her lips too quick, her smile too bright. Then, she slipped out of the room, humming softly to herself, her phone glued to her hand. He stood there for a long moment, listening to her footsteps fading down the hallway. His mind raced, anger surging, but he forced himself to stay calm. He knew what was coming. She thought she had him fooled, but she had no idea. This time, Ethan wasn't going anywhere. Claire had no clue that the walls were closing in around her. She had no idea that Ethan had canceled his trip, or that he had been watching her every move for weeks, quietly, methodically, piecing together the truth. The late nights, the sudden distance, the secretive glances at her phone. It all added up. She wasn't being careful enough. Not nearly careful enough. Ethan had installed cameras in the house. Small, unobtrusive devices hidden in the places where she and her lover would least suspect. In the living room, the kitchen, the hallway, and even the bedroom. Places where their affair would unfold, exposing them for the liars they were. For weeks, he had watched Claire dance around the truth, acting like she could balance both her lives, his faithful wife and someone else's secret lover. But tonight, it was all going to crash down. Tonight, he wasn't just going to catch her. He was going to destroy her. The moment Ethan left for his trip, Claire wasted no time. She flew around the house, straightening up, fixing her hair in the hallway mirror, and slipping into a dress he'd never seen before. The kind of dress a woman wears when she's trying to impress someone who wasn't her husband. Ethan sat in a small, dimly lit hotel room just 10 minutes away, his laptop open, every camera feed in the house displayed on his screen. He leaned back, watching the show begin. She really thought she was going to get away with this. The thought made his blood boil. But as angry as he was, Ethan wasn't done. He had one more card to play before the night was over. Earlier that day, while Claire had been at work, Ethan had prepared a special dinner for her, her favorite, spaghetti with homemade sauce. Only, this time, he'd added a little something extra, the strongest laxatives he could find. He wasn't just going to catch her in the act. He was going to make sure the night was an utter disaster for her and her lover. He'd given her the meal before he left, watching her eat it with a sweet smile on her face, all the while knowing what was coming next. Betrayal comes with consequences, Claire, and tonight, you're going to feel every single one. The doorbell rang, and Claire practically jumped. She rushed to the door, excitement dancing in her eyes. On the screen, Ethan watched her take one last look in the hallway mirror, fluffing her hair and smoothing out her dress before opening the door. There stood Derek, the man she had thrown everything away for. Ethan felt a mix of rage and disbelief. Derek wasn't the suave, handsome figure Ethan had imagined when he pictured the man his wife was risking everything for. He was balding, wearing a cheap shirt, and carrying a bottle of bargain wine. This is who you're willing to destroy our marriage for? Ethan thought, disgusted. But then again, Claire wasn't the woman he thought she was either. Derek stepped into the house, and they exchanged a quick kiss, a kiss that made Ethan's stomach churn. Claire giggled, offering him the wine, and they settled on the couch, pretending to be some romantic couple. But Ethan knew better. He knew their fantasy wouldn't last. It didn't take long for things to go wrong. Claire had barely finished her first glass of wine when she began to shift uncomfortably in her seat. She crossed her legs, uncrossed them, and then shifted again. Her face twitched, just a little at first, but enough for Ethan to notice. It was starting. The laxatives were kicking in. Claire excused herself with a tight smile and hurried to the bathroom, leaving Derek sitting clueless on the couch. Ethan switched to the bathroom feed, and there she was, looking frantic, her face pale, as she sat on the toilet, clearly regretting whatever was happening to her body. Ethan chuckled to himself. You wanted a perfect evening, didn't you, Claire? Let's see how perfect it feels now. She returned after several minutes, trying to play it cool, but Ethan could see the panic in her eyes. Her smile was forced, her body tense. Derek tried to resume the conversation, clearly hoping for some romance, but Claire couldn't sit still. Barely 10 minutes passed before she had to excuse herself again, this time rushing to the bathroom without a word. For the next hour, the situation spiraled out of control. Every time Derek tried to get close to Claire, she had to make a desperate dash to the bathroom, her body betraying her as thoroughly as she had betrayed Ethan. Derek's patience was wearing thin. He tried to put on a movie to lighten the mood, but Claire couldn't even sit through 5 minutes of it. She was up again, this time looking mortified as she bolted to the bathroom. Ethan couldn't contain his laughter. He leaned back in his chair, cracking open a beer, savoring every humiliating second of the night as it fell apart for them both. By the time Claire emerged from the bathroom for the 4th time, Derek had had enough. His frustration boiled over, and he confronted her. They argued, the tension finally snapping as Derek demanded to know what was going on. But Claire, too humiliated to admit the truth, just stammered out excuses about feeling unwell. Finally, Derek grabbed his jacket and stormed out, leaving Claire standing alone in the living room, her perfect night shattered. The next morning, Ethan returned home. Claire, pale and exhausted, greeted him at the door. She looked like she hadn't slept all night, her eyes puffy from what must have been hours of crying. "How was your trip?" she asked, her voice weak, a shadow of the confident woman who had welcomed another man into their home just hours ago. Ethan stared at her for a long moment, his heart pounding in his chest. Part of him wanted to yell, to scream at her for what she had done, for how she had betrayed him. But the cold, simmering anger that had been building inside him for weeks kept him calm. He wasn't going to yell. He was going to destroy her. "We need to talk," he said, his voice icy. Claire's smile faded. She knew. The look in her eyes shifted, from fake sweetness to raw panic. She tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. "I know everything, Claire," Ethan said, his voice like a blade slicing through the air. "I know about Derek. I know about your little late-night meetings. I know about the lies." Claire's face went white, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. "Ethan, Don't," Ethan interrupted, holding up a hand. "Don't insult me with more lies. I've seen everything. I've got cameras. I've got proof. And I know exactly what you've been doing behind my back." Her legs gave out, and she collapsed onto the couch, her face buried in her hands as sobs racked her body. But Ethan didn't care. He didn't flinch, didn't move. The sympathy he might have once felt for her was gone. This was who she was, and now she was facing the consequences. "I've already filed for divorce," Ethan said flatly. "You have until the end of the week to pack your things and get out. If you're not gone by then, I'll throw your stuff in the trash." Claire's sobbing grew louder, her hands shaking as she reached out to him, desperation in her eyes. "Please, Ethan, please. I made a mistake. I love you. We can fix this. I don't want to lose you." Ethan stepped back, his gaze cold. "Too late, Claire. You already lost me when you chose him." The next part of Ethan's plan was more personal. He wasn't just going to walk away from this and leave Claire to wallow in her misery. No, he wanted to burn everything down, including Derek's life. That afternoon, Ethan picked up his phone and dialed a number. Derek's wife, Sophie. Sophie answered, cheerful and oblivious to the storm that was about to hit her life. "Hello," she said, her voice light, as if nothing in the world could go wrong. "Hi, Sophie. My name's Ethan. I'm, Claire's husband." There was a long pause. Sophie's tone shifted immediately, confusion creeping in. "Oh, hi, Ethan. Is everything okay?" Ethan took a deep breath. "No, Sophie. Everything is not okay. I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this, but your husband has been having an affair with my wife. I've got proof. I thought you should know." Silence. For a long, agonizing moment, Sophie didn't say a word. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she asked, "Are you sure?" "Unfortunately, yes," Ethan replied, his heart heavy. "I can send you everything. Emails, texts, even footage from the cameras. You deserve to know the truth." Later that day, Ethan met Sophie at a small coffee shop, handing over the evidence that would change her life forever. She was beautiful, far more stunning than Ethan had imagined, and as he watched her face crumple while reading through the messages, he almost felt guilty. "Almost. I thought we were happy," Sophie whispered, her voice breaking as tears filled her eyes. How could he do this? Ethan sat with her for a long time, sharing their stories of betrayal, finding a strange sense of solidarity in their shared pain. By the time they parted ways, Sophie had made her decision. Derek's life was about to come crashing down, too. In the days that followed, Claire tried everything to win Ethan back. She called, texted, left voicemails, all filled with apologies and desperate pleas for forgiveness. But Ethan ignored them all. He was done. Meanwhile, Derek's world was unraveling. Sophie had served him with divorce papers, and just like Claire, he was left with nothing. The two of them, Ethan and Sophie, kept in touch, not as friends, but as allies in the same war. They were both survivors of the same betrayal, and that bond, however strange, kept them grounded. On the final day, Claire packed her last box and loaded it into the car. She looked tired, broken, like a shadow of the woman Ethan had once loved. But as she stood on the porch, looking at him one last time, he felt nothing. No anger, no sadness. Just the quiet satisfaction of knowing that he was free. "Goodbye, Claire," he said, his voice cold, final. "Goodbye, Ethan," she whispered, her voice trembling as she turned and drove away, disappearing down the street. But just when Ethan thought it was over, his phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Sophie. "We need to talk. There's something you need to know about Derek."